people have asked me if I would make a habit of suggesting a couple things to read. So I'll do that right here at the beginning. I would suggest that you add to your library a thin little book, but a really good one, important one, called The Depth, Psychology, and a New Ethic by Eric Newman. And Eric is spelled E-R-I-C-H, and Newman is L-E-U-M-A-N-N. Depth, Psychology, and a New Ethic. And then the second one is a book that contains probably 5 of the most profound channeled readings that I've ever come across. And it's found in Fatima Prophecy with Ray Stanford, S-T-A-N-F-O-R-D, Ray Stanford, Fatima Prophecy. So let us begin. Imagine that your head is immersed in an ocean of thoughts, swirling all about you. Truths, half-truths, misinformation, deceit. So what is the truth? Here is where discernment comes in, with the shoulds and the musts. Should I stay or should I go? Remember, isn't that the beginning or the title of a song, a pop song? Should I stay or should I go? All of the shoulds. I've run into 2 people who were Ayn Rand fans who say you never should say should. There shouldn't be any shoulds. Yeah, I used to get into some good discussions with them. Anyway, that's where discernment really comes in. Now, many claims that are made can be checked against facts, such as the effects of tobacco. Other claims are much harder to check, such as, should I marry Betty rather than Jane? With most trivial everyday claims, you can deal with them using a rule. Better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. For example, someone says, you must bring your jacket along. Maybe it was your mom that used to say that. And you are thinking, well, it's 89 degrees. Why bother bringing a jacket? Or they might say, you should always carry a flashlight in the car. These are very, very trivial. And there's a whole spectrum of options that William James talked about, going from trivial options to very momentous ones. Albert Einstein had a momentous question, is the universe friendly? You might have such questions like, or claims, come across such claims as there is a God, or there are angels, or we all have a soul. Remember from, oh gee, what was it? The play and the movie. Oh yeah, Les Mis. I imagine you've all seen Les Mis. Remember one of the main characters, and he makes that statement where he had talked to someone who had had his silver stolen from the church, and he says, I have a soul. How did he know? Remember that line? There is a well-known approach that rational people use, and it's been used since into the 17th century and on, and that's called Pascal's wager, and P-A-S-C-A-L, Pascal. I'm not going to go into that here because you could just go online and ask Honorable Google, and it'll tell you what Pascal's wager is. But that's a good one. And the rational beings that we are, we can look at claims in this way quite often. There are four things here that you probably should write down. If true, the claim that is, if true, and you take it as true, what difference would it make in my life? And then, if it's true, but you take it as false, oh, I don't believe in aliens, or I don't believe in UFOs, or whatever, what difference would that make in your life? And then third, if the claim is actually false and you take it as false, what difference would that make in your life? And then if false and you take it as true, what difference would that make in your life? Try those out, and I think you'll find something very interesting. That if you take something as true, that there is a God, let's say, or there are angels, and let's say that it really is false, your life would probably change in the same way as if it were true and you took it as true. Do you notice that? Ponder on those four things that you do logically. Now, our culture has become so materialistic that most adults don't even consider Pascal's wager. And notice now already how our culture is going to treat Christmas. We are basically consumers, and it's basically a materialistic enterprise. And what are you going to buy for this person? What are you going to buy for that? What am I going to get from you? All these questions, which have turned it into a very materialistic thing. I've often suggested that people should exchange gifts and to their friends and relatives, usual people, on December 6th, which is St. Nicholas Day, and then use Christmas actually to give some offerings to either organizations like the Salvation Army, or to Habitat for Humanity, or give to needy people, but not to exchange among all yourself, yourself. Because you've given Uncle George so many things over the last 30 years that you can't even think of anything else that he needs. So we have become just extremely materialistic. Now, the ordinary mortal self is such that it can arrive at approximations of the truth only. It can't arrive at real truth with a capital T. So you are left as a mortal self, which is your ordinary self, with doubt and uncertainty. Doubt cannot provide, however, the basis for a valid worldview. And if your mortal self, that's you, thinks it has arrived at certainty, oh, I've found it, I've got it, I don't need to look anymore, so that you don't have to search any longer for truth, then you find yourself closed-minded to growth and change. Now, we need to be open-minded, but not overly gullible. Hope, rather than doubt and certainty, hope is that which gives the proper basis for a reasonable good world conception. For it elicits the necessary commitment. Notice that it elicits a necessary commitment from the mortal self, and the mortal self needs that, while leaving us open to change. I'm going to act on this as though it were true, but with more knowledge that comes in, I may change my view. So you're open to change, but you are willing to commit Yeah, because if you don't make any commitments, you end up with psychologists called behavioral paralysis, and that's not a good place to be. You will find in your searching that there is much truth in Theosophy and Anthroposophy. Anthroposophy is a Western form of Theosophy. How do you know whether what you're reading and learning in Theosophy is true? That's a good question to ask. And I would say two things. It has for you the ring of truth. And secondly, it will explain or give meaning to the enigmas of life. Otherwise, we live with those enigmas, the mysteries of life. Some people have just kind of adapted to that, and they often use the expression, well, it's a mystery, and they just shrug their shoulders. But Theosophy, if you study it, will provide many ways to understand and give meaning to the enigmas of life. Now, you have learned in Theosophy, or maybe from Hindu spiritual philosophy, that Kali Yuga, K-A-L-I, Kali Yuga lasts for 10,000 years, and that's correct. A spiritual deepening gradually came over human consciousness beginning about 3100 BCE. You might think of it as having a U shape over time. And during the first 5,000 years, it's like a curtain came down over your perception so that we saw less and less spiritual light and only what the bodily senses can detect, what you can weigh, measure, and count. Kali Yuga reached its lowest point in that curve, that U-shaped curve, in 1899. Now that's significant because it then started to gradually lift, like a curtain starting to rise. By the end of Kali Yuga, the 10,000 years, most people will have clear spiritual perception. Now, it isn't the kind of spiritual perception that we had in the far distant past. We'll have a perception of the spiritual world that is sort of laid over on top of what we see with our mortal self. And there are ways to tell that difference. I won't go into that tonight. For several hundred years, it's been only those who were initiated in the mysteries who had spiritual sight. Now, however, there are individuals here and there who have natural clairvoyance. That's the expression that you find in your literature, natural clairvoyance. You maybe know some people like that. And their number will increase over the coming centuries. So what changes will this make? Let me list a few here. One, widespread materialism will not be possible. Now, practically everybody is materialistic, whether they know that or not. But in the future, that will be almost impossible because almost everyone you know, even if you don't, is seeing the spiritual world. It'd be like arguing, well, there isn't any green grass anywhere. Well, we see it everywhere. Second, there will be more and more people who will see, we'll put that see in quotes because it isn't like seeing with your eyes, it's seeing with the organs of perception of your soul. They will see the karmic consequences of what they have just done or are about to do. Now think about that. If you studied anything about karma, you know that it can be a very long time, even into future lifetimes, before the consequences of your actions play out. But there will be people, and it'll usually start with, well, I shouldn't put usually in that sentence. It will start with children. That's where you'll begin to see it. That they will see or know the karmic consequences of what they are just about to do. So I'm going to steal that baseball in the hardware store. Oops, I better not. This will greatly improve social behavior. Big difference. 3, there will be judges who will be able to see the guilt or innocence of those brought before them by reading their aura, you might say. And this will make a huge difference in our legal system. 4, our relationship to nature will greatly improve. Now, you have learned in your studies that humans are created with a dual nature. Our bodies are created from earth substances. Chemistry would explain your whole body construction. And that's where the expression in the Bible comes from dust thou art. But our soul and spirit come from above, from the spiritual spheres. Now, if we operate out of our material nature, which has become the default condition for practically everybody, we develop what's called the mortal self. That's your ordinary self, it's the mortal self. Now, responding to our heavenly nature, we develop our higher self. We respond to our higher nature by, let me see, I have a flow chart here. Let me see where that went. Digital. Well, isn't that straight? There it is. We found it. I didn't have to wait for the break. Okay, we respond to our higher nature by heeding the promptings of our ennobled principles that we have. For example, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And that comes to you when you're thinking about maybe countering what somebody else has said. But then it reminds you, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Or do unto others what you would have them do unto you. Or thou shalt not kill. Now we can learn to hear the voice of divine presence guiding us. That's how our higher conscience develops. So there's the ordinary conscience, which is socially conditioned. Even that's sort of the way that, well, you know how you did it with your children, teaching them not to put a paper clip in the wall on the electrical outlet, or to keep pulling the cat's tail, or petting it in the wrong direction. You teach them how to be sort of what's civilized and sort of clean around the house, pick up their toys and help clean up their room and share their toys with their friends and so on. So you do see that the mortal self can have a higher and higher conscience, but it only can go so far by itself. It requires the higher self to move it up beyond social conditioning, socialization, we would call it in psychology. Now, streaming down from The spiritual world is the higher knowledge, which you may have heard of in when you were in the school of Michael. That's Michael, Anglicanized, but around the world it's pronounced Michael, Michael. The school of Michael in the heavens before you were born. Then, when you hear it or read it, in whatever language you are born into, you experience what's called the ring of truth. And you kind of feel it all the way down to your bones. And you know from your studies, deep studies of Theosophy and Anthroposophy, that there are newer forms of elemental beings that help us to bring those spiritual truths, the deep spiritual truths of Theosophy, into the fiber of your being. So that's the ring of truth. So study Theosophy, Anthroposophy, steep yourself in it. Learn about karma and reincarnation. Learn about what happens between death and rebirth. Learn about the Theosophy of Rosicrucians. And they had the Theosophy really starting to spread in the 1400s, and more so as time went on. The whole idea of harmonizing the great world religions and world philosophies and bringing all people together as a family. So there's the basis for your Theosophical Society that started then in 1885, bringing people together as a family. So we are learning to recognize that we are one in the spirit, regardless of our form. Strive to become what you were created to be. For the tragedy of the common man, as it's been called, is to fail to become what you were created to be. So if you were on your dying bed with not too many days or weeks to go, and you'd be visited by a friend, and the friend would be talking to you about your life and so on, and you'd be saying, well, you know, I didn't do enough. I should have done more. And let's say your name is Joe, and your friend finally says, you know, you weren't created to become Moses. You were created to become Joe. And the point is, a lot of people don't know what they were created to be. Your parents aren't able to tell you. Your clergy are not able to tell you. Your psychiatrist is not able to tell you. So you're left without that kind of help. What was I created to be? Who was I created to be? And that should be one of the enigmas of life. And that's what Theosophy and Anthroposophy can help you to understand. You probably remember the great playwright Arthur Miller's play, Death of a Salesman, where he depicted the life of Loman. Was it Willie Loman? And Loman, you know, you could have asked Loman, or Loman probably would have said, I could have, or I would have. Those are answers that people get. If I hadn't become an alcoholic, oh, I could have been a great scientist. I could have, but you know, I got married too soon, started having babies, and then it's all of that. And I was 50 years old before I even got clear from all of that. and then I started to have problems with illness and so on. I could have really been great. So we have the could haves and might haves. The tragedy of the common man, as Arthur Miller called it. So educate your wants, but learn from Theosophy and Anthroposophy, karma and reincarnation. Learn about what happens between death and rebirth, and then learn about the Theosophy of the Rosicrucians. I repeated that because that's so important. Strive to become what you were created to be, and educate your wants. Now, Bertrand Russell was a major influence in my life. He was considered one of the major philosophers of the 20th century. And Russell was a rationalist. He really championed developing reason and logic. And yet, in his older years, Russell said that education of the intellect won't save humanity. What will be required is to educate people's wants. So they want better, higher things for humanity. They want justice and peace, for example, rather than other things. The mind, he says, is so clever that it will find ways to, even if it has to justify itself, it will find ways to get what it wants. So the key is to help people to develop their wants and to raise their wants to a higher level. To do this, you want to examine your beliefs and motives regularly. You should ask yourself, why did I say that? Or why did I do that? Now you usually get just shallow answers from people, but you probably haven't read the interpretation of dreams and Freud's work on everyday life, the psychopathology of everyday life. From that, we learned that to recognize that many of our desires are not very conscious to us at all, and why we do some things. Why did you drop and break that vase that you got from your mother-in-law at your wedding? Well, maybe why did you fail to show up to that appointment? Ask yourself the questions and start to explore that. Why did I do what I did, or to say what I said? As Socrates put it, the unexamined life is not worth living. And I so agree with that. There is so much that the mortal self can do to improve your life and your whole being. But there's a limit beyond which it needs help. And help is available. There are mighty unseen helpers along the path of spiritual growth. There are also people along the way that are given you by the spiritual world to assist you. And most of all, there is a divine voice, but it requires the listening ear. Remember, for those who have ears to hear, and the willingness to follow the promptings that you receive from this voice. So there isn't just the promptings that you get from just ordinary socialization process and our ordinary culture, like Bambi. That movie had an incredible influence on me. I don't know if I was 3 or 4 when I saw it. But I remember Thumper's mother, and I've used it all my life. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. This is a good prompting. And there are all sorts of other promptings that you're aware of. Oh, I should have called my brother today. Maybe I should. Oh, but then you get busy and you don't end up doing it. But then on another time, you're prompted to, let's say, call your brother again. And this time, you tell him about your father is very, very ill in the hospital and may not last through the week. You better get on a plane and get up here. And then he said, I am so glad you called. Now, ordinarily, you probably wouldn't have called at all, and maybe let weeks, months go by before you communicate with your brother or sister or someone else. But those promptings, you start paying attention to those promptings. They seem to be tailor-made for me, and they seem to be making a good difference. You can't use that as evidence to convince some of your friends about the paranormal, but it does start to make a difference with you. You start building up a confidence in these promptings that they're coming from something higher. I don't know what they are, the mortal self will say, but they seem to be important, and I'm starting to pay more attention to them. These are the ordinary mortal self's promptings. But this still small voice, this divine voice that can be heard if you have ears to hear, give promptings that go way beyond, go a much higher level, and will carry you to where you were created to be. Like I said before, your coaches, your teachers, your clergy, your parents, none of them know what you were created to be. Teacher Smith wants you to be a mathematician. Well, that's what he wanted to be, or that's what he is. Or someone else wants you to go into sports because your coach likes athletes and thinks you have potential. They all have some idea of what you should do with yourself, what you should become. I saw that in hundreds of college students, but that isn't really what you were created to be, because they don't know what you were created to be. But your angel, your guardian angel, are there guardian angels? Well, yes, there are. I speak to lots of groups, and in many of those groups, people will say that they were ex-Methodists or ex-Lutherans or ex-Roman Catholics or whatever, but they've given it up and don't see any real value in it anymore. But I have an easy time when I'm talking Theosophy or Anthroposophy, mentioning guardian angels. Oh, yeah, I believe in those. They learned about those when they were little, or when you teach about Kamaloka, and the people who are ex-Roman Catholics, they say, "Oh, that's purgatory." So they do have something that's left in them that helps them to learn at a deeper level. Now that's true for a lot of other things besides just purgatory and guardian angels. And in your Theosophy Society or Theosophical Society, you offer a lot of things, a wide variety of things, interesting things that people can sample. It's sort of like attending a good smorgasbord. You get to sample this and sample that and so on. And finally, you might discover something. Oh, Edgar Casey really speaks to me, or something else, or the seven rays, or whatever it might be. You tasted it, and that spoke to you. So you followed it. And I've watched people over the years and have seen that when I see they're really excited, they're talking about something. Oh man, you got to learn about this. And they're all into it. And I see them 5 years later, and they haven't gotten anywhere with it. It's like they thought that, astrology was explaining everything that was going to happen in their life, and now they haven't done anything with it, or numerology, or whatever. So there's this smorgasbord, but don't dismiss the value of that. Even though it may, as you think, wasted many years of your life hunting and searching before you finally got getting deeper into Theosophy or Anthroposophy, or the Theosophy of the Rosicrucians, you have something of value that will make it easier for you to accept certain ideas that otherwise people have a hard time grasping. Or if you grew up watching Star Wars, you have picked up something in your background that makes it much easier to understand, let's say, the role of Mani, Buddha, Gautama Buddha, and Mani, M-A-N-I, and the Maitreya Buddha, the next Buddha. The flame, let's say, will be passed from the Gautama Buddha to the Maitreya Buddha, and it takes 5,000 years before that totally takes place. And during those 5,000 years, the individuality that will become the Maitreya Buddha then is the Maitreya Bodhisattva now. And the Maitreya Bodhisattva is around in practically every century, here or there on the planet, doing good and helping humanity to evolve. Mani is misunderstood. So what you hear from ordinary religion or theologians and so on about the Manichaeans is almost totally wrong. They misunderstand it completely. Mani is the one that will help a portion of humanity become really, really good at transforming evil into good. And that will become very important in the future. You might say that Jungians, Carl Jung, Jungians are already in that Manichaean stream when they work with the shadow, and psychosynthesis works a lot with the shadow, transforming it into something good or better. So that's Mani's role. But you hear people claim that the Maitreya Buddha is already here. That's not true. It's the Maitreya Bodhisattva, and there's a big difference between a Bodhisattva and a Buddha. So that's a kind of discernment that's necessary. So we have these great teachers that are helping us to develop our understanding And the things that you sampled along the way, even though they may have taken, been a kind of an almost a dead end for you, and you think you might have wasted 5 years on that, has a value. So don't discount what you've already come through, but just find your way then to something deeper. So there are these mighty unseen beings that will help you along the way. And then some seen beings, that is other human beings, that are given to you, brought into your life in one way or another. They just sort of happen into your life. They're placed there by the spiritual world to assist you on your way. Now then, but most of all, beyond even these mighty helpers, is this divine voice that I mentioned, requires not just the voice, but the listening ear. And then, after you've heard it, the willingness to follow the promptings you receive. Now, this whole area of psychology dealing with will and belief is really, really interesting to me. Your heart center is what you set your sight on, and that doesn't bring you to do it or to really live it. It has to also involve your throat center, which involves willingness to do it. And lots of times we're not willing to do it. Many people say one thing, that they would never do anything that's racially biased or prejudiced or whatever. And then when psychologists do studies, they find that in actual situations, they do what they said they wouldn't do. So they don't have the courage to live up to what it is that they really, really know they should do. So courage, that's a heart factor. And so we need the forces of the heart, but we also need the forces of the will to go into action and begin to live in your daily life, even if your relatives start praying for you because they think you've gone way off track, and you don't just believe what they still believe in the church they go to. You need courage. Lots of people that you know that were your close friends think you've just gone off the rails, and maybe don't want to have much to do with you anymore. You have to have the courage to face up to what is likely to happen if you make a big change in your life for the better. A lot of people like to keep you just the way they knew you were. So the voice is a real voice. Now this is extremely important. At the time of Moses, it was the case that people experienced, let's say, or saw God, let's say, in the elements, in the wind and the storms and the lightning and so on. But by the time you get to Elijah, this has changed greatly. So it isn't so much that you see the God in the storms and so on, but that you hear the still small voice. And that's a really important change in human consciousness. The still small voice. to get a better idea of the voice of this divine presence, you begin to feel that this prompting in your heart is not just picking up some high level thoughts that are swirling in your environment, but that it's actually it's beginning to seem like it's acting like it's a living presence in the center of your being. And you maybe have already started to feel that. That is really important. Now, if you haven't started to feel it yet, don't feel disappointed. I mean, just that's coming for you sooner or later. But already it's starting to show up that there are people who are experiencing that the presence of a divine being in their heart center, in the center of their being. And this gives them promptings. It doesn't give them orders and commands and just take over their behavior. What the initiates did through the centuries was to give out into the population at large various things that would help them, and sometimes it was games like chess. Chess is really important for developing the human being, and it'd be great when your grandkids come to visit you that you teach them how to play chess. That's extremely important. And then there are the games. But there are all kinds of teachings and stuff that they gave. And one of these that was so important was Pinocchio, where you learned that you're not to be on puppet strings. And in this case, not by, what was his name? Giuseppe? Was he the guy who made Pinocchio? He had the puppet strings, and he could make Pinocchio do this or that. And you aren't to become just a being on puppet strings that are being operated by the spiritual world. You are to become a real human being, like Pinocchio, becoming a real boy. That was a major teaching for the Western world, the story of Pinocchio, so that you don't operate on strings pulled by the divine spiritual world. If you weren't created with a dual nature, you would never have become free as a human being. You'd be on puppet strings. Everything you did and said would be just a manifestation of what the divine wanted to do through you. What's happened now, and has been happening more and more with our consciousness becoming aware of it, is that this divine spiritual presence that sort of, you might say, enters into you and begins to dwell there and give you promptings, does not pull the puppet strings, but gives you freedom. You can hear it and decide not to do it. Oh, I'll do it. I'm too busy. I'll do it tomorrow. And tomorrow comes and you're busy again. And so you keep putting it off. You have freedom to do it or not. So it allows you to become a free being, even free from the divine world. So you had to go through lifetimes where you wrote off all of the divinization games and stuff people did. Now we see you can do it again, but you can do it with a higher consciousness. But you had to go through a time when you discounted numerology, tea leaves, reading tea leaves, astrology, all those things. You had to go through a period, maybe not a whole lifetime, or even maybe more than one, where you discounted all of that. You cut all the puppet strings. You didn't follow it. You followed your own inclinations, and you stood on your own 2 feet and made your own choices. You had to become that sort of a being, free. And then as you get more and more drawn to a deep spiritual understanding, then you use that freedom in a much, much higher way. You are no longer just a puppet. The higher spiritual beings, and there are 9 ranks or levels of beings above us, as you know, all the way from the seraphim and cherubim down to the angels and archangels and archi beings and so on. All of these ranks of beings do not have freedom like you do. You are created to be among this 10th rank that's being formed. And it'll take a long time for it to be totally formed, but it's well on its way, where you will be able to operate out of not only compassion, but love. And not cheap love, but divine love, which got the name agape. You'll be able to operate out of divine love, out of total freedom. You choose to do it. So you grew up probably taken to church by your parents, and you learned to pray and so on, and then maybe you grew out of that by college time. But you remember saying, not my will, but thine be done. And that's a free choice now. You're choosing it to live according to the highest will. And that's extremely important. It's a huge step in human development. And it will take a long, long time before the whole of humanity reaches that level. So you can be already a pioneer in that development of consciousness. And then out of that understanding, you can teach, because everyone is obligated to teach if they have anything at all that should be taught. Even if you don't become any kind of a professional teacher, you teach by people observing you, people at work, people you associate with. They observe you, and they begin to wonder, how is it that you aren't just a happy moron whistling a happy tune when you're knowing what's actually happening around the world. You are very aware of what is taking place in the world, and yet you're filled with joy. You may be so sad at times and so full of sorrow because of the stupidities of what people are doing towards one another, that tears come to your eyes. But this joy, this underlying joy, will shine through those tears. It's just like a January day in Minnesota, where it has snowed during the night, and now it's a beautiful sunny day, and it's about 12 degrees or so, or maybe less than that. And you see the sun shining on these new snowflakes all over the yard, and they just sparkle like diamonds. And that's the way you'll start to appear. The joy will shine through your eyes, even if you're sorrowful at times. And remember that high-level beings, Jesus of Nazareth, wept over Jerusalem. It isn't that you get so highly developed that you don't feel any sorrow for what's going on. But you don't lose that underlying joy. And a good part of that comes from having the ears that hear. And by that it means organs of perception of your soul are beginning to operate. Now, to get a better idea of the voice of divine presence, let us use an analogy. Let's think of the GPS. Now, you know what a GPS is, and we're going to start out with an external GPS and then move to an internal GPS. So I call this first part here my fantasy GPS. When I was with the Whitson Institute in Minneapolis, I drove from Moorhead to Minneapolis every weekend for several years. No matter what the weather, terrible snowstorms, whatever, I drove there. And that was 240 some miles. And so sometimes I'd be staying late talking with people, maybe leave there at 10:30 at night and then have to drive back to Moorhead. And I would get very sleepy. I could stay pretty awake till St. Cloud, and then start getting more sleepy by Alexandria, and then that last 100 miles. Oh man, I would eat sunflower seeds to try to stay awake, but then I realized I was taking in too much salt. And then I would slap myself and pinch myself, and then I'd start singing real loud, try to wake me up. Sometimes I'd get out of the car and walk around. And I didn't want people to stop and ask me if I needed help. So I pretended I was peeing in the ditch. And then I'd get back in the car and be awake for some miles, and then I'd start getting sleepy again. Oh man. So I started to fantasize. Now, this was back in the early days, of technology. So I did have a cruise control. I had a Honda, loved Hondas, and I started to think that what if I connected my GPS to the cruise control? And then I just put the seat back and closed my eyes and just kind of dozed off till I got home. And of course, that wouldn't work. That's a crazy fantasy. But you get the idea of a GPS. And I'm going to change my flow chart here. Now, suppose that we've gotten much more technological, and that your GPS, your Garmin, or whatever you're using, is so sophisticated that it knows you real well. Of course, they're already knowing a lot about you. They check everything what you do on the computer and learn about you. So let's say that there's a voice on there, and you have your choice of a male or a female voice on yours. And so but it tells you what the internet knows about you. And it uses that to guide you. It might say, this is the shortest way, but you might find it very interesting to take this side trip around here. Won't take too long, and you might enjoy it. And it might have all kinds of stuff in there like that. So it'd be really helpful. You could think that, this is getting to be really, really good. But this great help, the greatest help you could possibly imagine, is like an internal guidance system, and it knows you better than you even know yourself. And it knows everyone else even better than they know themselves. And so when you get together and start and meet other people, there's something that's operating in both of you that helps you to find a way to work together and a way to see that you are both one in the spirit. And so this this living presence then is something that you can experience. And we ended before the break with that thought that if you aren't experiencing that yet, you have it ahead of you. There's nothing that will keep you from having that experience, except your mortal self, your personal mortal self, and the mortal brain will try all sorts of ways to get you to not pay much attention to this higher influence. Now, I'm going to add something here that may seem like a little sidetrack, but you might be wondering if this great inner presence, this divine presence, can guide me to become what I was created to be. Why aren't a number of us becoming perfect in this lifetime? And the reason is that it will take a very, very long time before you become what you were created to be. Thousands of years ahead. But you will be making progress all the way. And you will come to understand this better than through your study of Theosophy and Anthroposophy, in that you are given, with the help of higher beings, what it is you need to do and learn, and where you need to grow up, and who needs to be your parents, and what language you learn to speak, and all that is all you go over that. You develop a plan, mostly with the help of higher spiritual beings. You develop a plan for your next lifetime that you're headed for, and that plan is your intermediate logos, let's say, the word, the plan, the design, the heavenly design for your life. And it's like a mosaic. It's let's say you see a very large mosaic being painted, maybe for a city, and they're painting a whole block of walls. And an artist manages to get just a little bit of that done over 10 or 20 years. It needs to be finished by other artists or whatever. It's like that with your lifetime. When you become what you were created to be, you will be so far ahead of where you are now that if, and I believe it was William James that said this, if you spotted yourself in your far distant future condition, you would be so awestruck you'd go splat down on your prostrate on the ground, thinking you were in very holy presence. And that would be you that you're experiencing. That you're only half baked now. You'll be in the oven for for a long, long time yet before you're fully baked. But already you've come so far with your consciousness that you're aware of freedom, of choice, and you know that life is based out of choice and changes, and you can start using those to improve your life. And you're doing that now all the time. So what you accomplish and what this spiritual being helps you to accomplish is to become, to fulfill the life plan that was designed for you in the spiritual world before you were born. And that is just a small part then of the whole mosaic of your life. But that's what you need to accomplish in this lifetime, to fulfill that plan, that logos with a little L, let's say, of your life for this lifetime. Now, your true being, what you will be created to be, but they can't do that to you yet. It would be jumping too far ahead. And I call that pole vaulting. You miss some steps along the way if you try to do that. Your guardian angel is assigned to carry your true blueprint until you become it. And then it is freed up to some other task. But that's an assignment that each of you have, that each one of you have, is that guardian angel bearing your divine blueprint till you become it. So it is sort of safeguarded there. So even if somebody lives a life that is so far removed from what it is they were created to be this lifetime, that it's just almost a total failure, it isn't lost. Your guardian angel still has it. And between death and rebirth, especially the second half, when you're starting to develop your descent down back into this plane of existence, you will work at, with the help of higher beings, creating a plan for that next lifetime. So it won't be lost. But some people don't get very far in a particular lifetime. Once I was in Colorado, up in the Continental Divide, and stopped to one of these signs that tell you about it. And it said that the growing season there is 19 days a year. And I thought, holy smokes, how did these trees get so big? I mean, they must have been here for centuries at 19 days a year. And then I got to thinking about people, about us, and about how many of us maybe have only the comparable 19 days of our spiritual growth and development in a lifetime. But eventually we'll become our true self. Now, this presence then, this living presence, it is very loving, and it never scolds you harshly. It may call you up on something and try to help you correct your pathway if you've wandered off of it, but it won't do it for you, and it'll just prompt you back into that direction, and it'll do it in a loving way. And it will begin to fill you with peace, a peace that is just beyond understanding. You try with your rational mind to figure out, how could I feel so peaceful when I'm not this happy moron going through life, not paying any attention to what's happening in the world. I am aware of what's happening. And indeed, it would make a person cry. And yet, I still believe that we shall overcome someday. That we will evolve as a human race, and we'll evolve as a family where we are united with our philosophy and our spirituality and our understanding of life itself. Now, these momentous claims are getting louder and more frequent. I don't want to even list them because it tends to generate fear in people. So you know what's going on, so I don't need to mention them. But you know that they seem to have multiplied 100-fold from when you were younger. Now, one of the things that one hears a lot, so on that hand, you hear a lot of the gloom and doom predictions about what climate change is going to do to property values along coastlines, the increase beyond imagination of migrations of people to other places in the world where they aren't welcome, and what that's going to do, because must be about 90% of the population of humanity lives within 100 miles of a coastline. So think of that. That's going to make a huge difference. And then all sorts of other things that you're learning about. And many people are giving gloom and doom predictions about that. And then on the other hand, there are these sugar and spice and everything nice predictions. And often these come from, well, not only the happy morons, but from spiritual groups that you probably put a lot of trust in along the way, and they're telling you about the golden age that's just over the horizon, and how they're streaming down all kinds of influences that are increasing the vibrations of the planet, and the whole planet and you and everyone else are growing by leaps and bounds, and oh my, it's going to be nice in a few years. You could really get drawn into that sugar and spice thing. But maybe that's a nice balance for the gloom and doom. But you need to become what a Concordia student said when I was at a retreat with a number of kind of advanced students and a number of faculty. We were for a several-day retreat at one of the lake places in Minnesota. And we'd have conversations about the college and what we're learning and all that. And the question was asked by one of the faculty members, what is it that you as bright students believe that is happening to you in your college years? And they would come up with this or that idea, and we'd just kind of nod a little bit, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. And then one student said, we're being trained to become sophisticated crap detectors. And everybody nodded, everybody. Yes, that's it. You're becoming a sophisticated crap detector. And so that's what we need to be, to sort out this stuff. And one way to think of that, in maybe less crude terms than a crap detector, is the farmers in Minnesota there. You know a lot about farming, even if you didn't grow up on a farm. You know what combines are, you know how the fields are harvested, you know that a combine goes through and it spits out all the chaff, and that makes up most of it, but it keeps the kernels of wheat or barley or oats or whatever, and the dumps that into your trailer. So it's a very sophisticated machine that sorts out the wheat from the chaff. And that's what you need to become, kind of like a combine that goes through life sorting things out. So when you're thinking, geez, how come there's all of this chaff? You might say, how come the kernels are the majority? No, then you got to expect a lot of chaff, and just sort that out and gather up the kernels as you go. So what do you do? Do you find just a happy medium between the doom and gloom and the sugar and spice views of the world? Well, you can do that, find a happy medium, but much more is to be done with it, and that is to blend them. Now that's a new idea, novel idea, to blend them. How in the world do you do that? And you might ask, what is the difference between finding a happy medium and learning to blend them? And here, to do this, we take two archetypal symbols, the prophet and the priest. And there are other archetypal symbols that you've studied, the king and the hero and so on. But let's take these two, the prophet and the priest. Now, a true prophet is divinely inspired to challenge the king or the officials of the establishment, the rulers of the establishment, and for the need to change. Inspired as they are, they have the courage to go and face these officials. It might be people in government or in any level of authority, and challenge these rulers for the need to change. And he or she, that is the prophet, is not a fortune teller, but an agent of change. He or she then is an agent of change. You are doing things that are not good for the people, and you must stop doing what you are doing. And they may even then indicate what might be the consequences of continuing to do what they are doing. Now, the true priest then is different. The true priest, rather than the true prophet, is one who is inspired to hold out a positive vision of what could be. And he or she is an agent of growth. Now, we blend them together then by removing all fatalism and with just enough fear to encourage change and take direction from the positive vision. Now, about positive fear. You would be glad if your 3-year-old grandchild had enough fear so that when it started climbing up a 20-foot ladder up to the top of your roof, it would just go up a few steps and then want to come back down. You wouldn't want one that just kept climbing up and up. You'd be really terrified. You'd be climbing up after the child. There is a value to a limited amount of fear. The fear that cigarette smoking will give you lung cancer or whatever, it might be just enough to get you to stop doing some things that you're doing, smoking too much or whatever. A little bit of fear is a value, just like a little bit of pain keeps you from biting your tongue off and burning your hand in the fire when you're roasting marshmallows. You it's a value to you. But too much fear is really, really a serious thing, a negative thing. And that's what's happening to a lot of people, is that they're filling with fear, and they're feeling like a big boot is going to drop soon. The anxiety is almost so thick you could cut it with a knife. It really is serious. Now, what you learn when you start paying attention to this living presence in the center of your being, in your heart center, is that you don't carry any longer that incapacitating fear. You start feeling extreme peace. I feel like when there's a little bit of rain on a hot summer day, and it just comes over you, and you almost feel like if you were younger, kind of just run around the yard dancing and singing. It feels so good to have that happen, and you feel this fear leaving you, because fear and love are incompatible emotions. And where love is, fear can't be. So if you then start thinking, well, geez, when I try to tell the neighbors that I've got this living presence in my heart, they just, oh, really? You can't convince anybody that way. But you are experiencing it as it must be true. I'm not making this up, you say. I do experience this peace. And then you start feeling joy. And you don't know why. Now that was a hard one for me. I could experience the peace, and I could experience love, and I could experience a number of other things. But joy, the joy, just a rapturous joy, rejoicing. I had to admit that I'm more joyful when the Vikings make a touchdown than when I hear anything about this spiritual being in my heart center. So that took quite a while, and I had to learn that there is a kind of a sober joy that maybe we Scandinavians have, I hope. It's like the Norwegian man who loved his wife so much that he almost told her. That's sort of the way we are. We have a kind of a sober joy, but it's there, and so that also came. But the peace and the love and the joy, and this love will start to fill your cup like a chalice, and it will fill it to overflowing, and it will flow out to others. And it doesn't matter whether those others are just your neighbors, or whether they are strangers, or whether they are enemies. It flows out to everyone, and that will make a difference in the life of humanity as more and more of us start radiating out this love and this joy. Because believe it or not, you have to sort of till the soil so that the seeds of spiritual development can really take hold and grow. Two of the things that really help till the soil are love and laughter. Laughter is good medicine. And now this is healthy laughter, not laughter made at racial jokes or just elementary school body humor, but you know, a deeper, higher level of laughter is really healthy for us as human beings. It is good medicine. Now, so we have these two symbols then of the prophet and the priest, and we're learning then to not swing way toward the one or way toward the other, but to blend the two together, so that you take away the as I mentioned, the too much fear, but you also take away something even more important, and that is you take away fatalism, because these two extremes tend to produce fatalism. That is, that you just sort of sit back and kind of wait for it to happen. My mother used to say, she went through the Depression years, that, well, we'll just muddle through it and hope for the best. You don't just wait for it to happen. You need to overcome fatalism. And many of the people that you know, good acquaintances and well-meaning, they won't be intending to say something harmful to you, but something bad happened, well, it was just meant to be. No, nothing just meant to be. You know that. You've gotten over fatalism. You know the song, what is it? Seiki Sara Sara, whatever will be, will be. Remember that song? Whatever will be, will be. That's a view that a lot of people still have, fatalism. And you can't, boy, you might have heard that. Somebody with a very loud muffler just went by. Must have been frustrated at something. Anyway, you've learned then to get beyond fatalism and realize that choice and change goes deep. You can make a difference in your life by the choices that you make, and you're free to make those choices. Now, the true priest then is one who is inspired to hold out a positive vision of what could be. So I've repeated that because it's so important. And maybe just like you can be a teacher, even if you're an engineer or something else, you don't have to be a professional classroom teacher to be a teacher. In the same way, you don't need to be an ordained priest in order to be priestly. One of the beliefs that Hope and I grew up with as Scandinavians was that of the priesthood of all believers. And so you can, no matter what else you're doing, you can be priestly in the sense that you hold out a positive vision for the future, and you don't put out a false message that this is going to happen, maybe next month or by 2 years from now, but it's something more gradual. But it will come. We shall overcome someday. So you seek the things that are good, true, and beautiful. And wherever there is good, you set your heart on it. And when you look toward that future, that vision, that positive vision for humanity, then that is what is meant by the eye that is single. And those who have the eye that is single then they will have a body that's filled with light. Now, I want to say something about some transformations of humanity, going from light to life to love. Back in see, where you know that there are many cycles, 7 huge cycles of time, and within those are 7 further subcycles, and then 7 ages within each of those subcycles. And so we are in a point of going in this particular cycle of 7 ages. The second age was an age of far ancient Persia, and it was an age of the great teacher and inspirer of that age, Zarathustra, and of the teachings of light and darkness. So many of our philosophies and ideas about life, like you saw in Star Wars, is this contest between light and darkness. Then you get to the Egyptians, and you find there the mummification and a lot of emphasis on death and life, where life is extremely important for that particular age. And then you get to the Greeks and Romans, and there, especially with the Greeks, you find love or eros. Now, when you're reading superficially, you'll think eros in the way that Hollywood does, and think of it just as what our culture has done with the word erotic then. But for the Greeks, it wasn't that way. It was like the kind of love that you see in a 5-year-old. It was the kind of love that Hollywood wouldn't make a movie about. It's the kind of love that is much different than making love in the back seat of a car. This is what the Greeks meant by love, eros. And then you get to our age, where we are working on the good and having to face all sorts of things that are not good in order to overcome them in working toward the good. And so you have this emphasis then on light, love, and life. When you think of oh my, have we gone way overnight? It's 8:20. No, wait a minute. It's 8 o'clock here. It's 8 o'clock.
Yeah, it's 9 here. It's true.
Okay.
Okay, no, you're fascinating. That is for sure.
We'll just go a little bit longer.
Okay, just a little bit. All right.
The ancient artifacts that we're all aware of, Stonehenge and so on, those big boulders that are set up, where during initiation training, way back, thousands of years ago, the people, the initiates, were learned to see what came to be known as the sun at midnight. Now, that doesn't mean literally to see the sun at midnight. You could do that in Norway, but in spiritual terms, they had to learn to see the spiritual light as well as the physical light. And they would stand by these boulders, just to sort of by the side, on the inside, and they would move around the clock, and they would be practicing seeing the light that would go right through the boulders, but the regular daylight couldn't penetrate the boulder. And when they had arrived at the point where they could see the spiritual light, then they were ready for an advanced level of enlightenment. They were ready. Now that's what happens during the Christmas season, the 12 days of Christmas and the 13 nights. They culminate on January 6th. And January 6th is when they took the highest, most advanced, we would call them students, but they were candidates for initiation, who were judged to be ready to go out and experience a test to see if they actually could see the light that passed through material objects. Now this light is spiritual light, and one of the masters of humanity, Jesus, the Christ in Jesus, said, "I am the light." And then this was very important for Zarathustra, who was teaching back in that second age of this cycle of ages. And it was Zarathustra whose two very high level followers, they weren't called students in those days, were reborn in Egypt as Hermes and Moses. And this light then is light that came down when, at the time of Zarathustra, he would see it associated with the sun, and he called it Ahura Mazda. And Ahura Mazda then was this spiritual being that was a high-level being associated with the sun for benefit of humanity. And this spiritual light moved down closer and closer to the earth, and finally became incarnated in the body of Jesus of Nazareth. And this light, this spiritual light then is carried by that being. And because it was carried in a human being, it didn't overwhelm the people who were close to him. Otherwise, your mortal self would not survive. As the saying goes, those who lift the veil of Sophia die. And Moses was told not to look into the face of God or he would die. The glory of it is too overwhelming for the mortal self to assimilate. It just would disintegrate. It would just be torn to pieces. It's too much for it. But if it's carried in the body of a human being, then that human being then can be around you and heal you and do all sorts of miraculous things, but not destroy you. Now that light then is not just in the body, physical body of Jesus of Nazareth, but was in the soul. And when the body then was crucified, the soul then carries that light. And then with the resurrection and the ascension of the Christ, then this Christed being can come to you spiritually and knock at your door and enter into the throne room of your heart and be there so that the light, then this divine light of the universe, you might say, then can rise within you. And we could go on, in terms of life, and so I'm afraid that we'd run way over time. And even though your minds probably don't get so tired, your buns get tired sitting so long. So we should close with a verse that I like so well. This was how and why we started the Whitson Institute in Minneapolis. The Waldorf schools were so generating so much interest among parents that they were asking, can't there be a kind of a Waldorf school for parents? And that's what we did. The Whitson Institute was to be that sort of thing. Now, because if you have a kid that comes home from an ordinary school, and I'm not saying anything bad about ordinary schools, just how things are, and you ask your kid, a fourth grader or whatever, what do you learn in school today? They'll just say, oh, nothing. And that's the way that is. But if you ask a Waldorf school kid, well, what did you learn at school today? They'll say, well, we learned to wonder at beauty, stand guard over truth, look up to the noble, and resolve on the good. This leads us truly to purpose in living, to right in our doing, to peace in our feeling, and light in our thinking. And teaches us trust in the working of God, in all that there is, in the widths of the world, and in the depths of the soul. And as a parent, you think, whoa, they learned that in school. I want to send my kids to a Waldorf school. In fact, I wish I were a Waldorf student, but I'm too old. So that's how we got our start. So let's at least I'll quit at this point. If any of you want to hang for a little bit and ask any question or thing burning in your mind or soul, feel free to do so.